Hello PLP geometry. Welcome to the last video of Unit 2. We made it, right? So this is the 8th lesson in Unit 2. We're going to do more with triangle proofs, but we're going to use what's called CPCTC. So this is the last video of Unit 2, covering congruence transformations. Congruence transformations. So again, we can't forget about all that stuff we did the first half of this unit, right? And then working with triangles. Okay, so again, this is number 8 here, and we're going to do triangle proofs. Triangle proofs. But we're going to involve, so with what is called CPCTC. All right. So I mentioned CPCTC in a previous video, so let's revisit what that means. So CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And, you know, as an abbreviation, we use the letters CPCTC. And we'll talk more about this in the proofs, but again, the idea is that once you prove the triangle's congruent, all of the corresponding parts are congruent. So typically, when you prove two triangles congruent, you only need 3 parts, right? Sides and angles, combination. But once you do that, then the other 3 parts that you didn't talk about are also congruent. And that's what our proofs are going to be focused on. Okay, so I have 2 proofs, and that's all we got in this video, right? So quick and easy, right? Okay, so example 1 here. Okay, so we are going to be given segment WX. So segment WX is congruent to segment YX. And segment XZ, segment XZ, I apologize, bisects angle WXY. Okay, and here's our picture. So we have a big triangle like this, kind of wide and flat. Okay, we'll call that triangle WXY. And then we have this segment XZ going down the middle. And there's Z. So there's my picture. Okay? And we want to prove in this picture that angle W is congruent to angle Y. Okay? Let me set up my statements and reasons. So we get our 2-column proof statements. Reasons. Okay. And now I'm going to change colors and talk about some things. Okay. So, I want you to realize that when you have to prove something other than congruent triangles, right, this reason is going to be CPCTC. And remember that the CT stands for congruent triangles. So, our first job is to prove these 2 triangles congruent. Once we do that, then we can say that W and Y are also congruent because angle W and angle Y are corresponding parts of these 2 triangles. And if we prove the triangle is congruent, then they're also congruent. So it's really nothing new except one extra step from the last lesson. So we always start with the given, right? So given segment WX is congruent to segment YX, and segment XZ bisects angle WXY, and that is given to us. Okay, so I will mark WX segment congruent to YX. Okay, so I'm going to put an S on that. That is one of the sides we need to prove these 2 triangles congruent. Now, I see that segment XZ bisects an angle. So this angle is WXY. If I trace WXY and I trace XZ, I hope you can see the 2 angles in green that are now going to be congruent. And it's going to be this angle here and that angle here. And that is our step 2. Because we have an angle bisector, we know that there are two angles that are now congruent, and that is WXZ. So angle WXZ is now congruent to angle YXZ, and that is going to be because of an angle bisector. Right? An angle bisector splits an angle into two congruent angles. And now, next to this arc, I'm going to put an A. So there's an angle pair, right? So now I am 2/3 of the way to proving this triangle is congruent. I have a side, I have an angle, and now it's time to find another congruent side or another congruent angle. Well, if I look at the picture, let's remember that when our triangles share a side, and that side is XZ, we can say that segment XZ is congruent to itself. So step 3, XZ, segment XZ is congruent to segment XZ. This is the reflexive property. Remember, it's like looking in a mirror, right? And I'm going to put another S right here, and there are my 3 pieces of information, and now I can say that these two triangles are congruent. So in step 4, name one of the triangles. I'll name the triangle on the left, WXZ. Doesn't matter how you name that one. Triangle WXZ is congruent. But now you should try to be in corresponding order. So W and Y line up. X is the same as X in both triangles, and Z is the same as Z in both triangles. So triangle YXZ. This is going to be true because I see two sides and an angle, and that angle is in between the sides. This is side, angle, side. And now that I know these two triangles are congruent, now I know that all of the other corresponding parts are congruent. Angle W and angle Y are a pair of corresponding angles, so they are now going to be congruent. So angle W is congruent to angle Y, and this is because of CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And that's it. So if you have proving triangles congruent handled, then this should just, be a breeze for you. Okay? And if it's not, that's okay. Proofs are tough. Remember that. Okay. Example 2. Okay. So now let's be given that segment JL is congruent to segment NL. And let's be given that segment JK is parallel, right, to MN. And again, you got to know that 11 looking thing means parallel, right? And I want to prove that segment JK is congruent to segment NM, order. NM. N. Oh, it's a terrible M, but there you go. NM, you know what that is. Okay. Here's my picture. So I'm going to draw it like this. So I'm going to draw a segment across, and I'll draw a segment like this. Okay, and we'll connect those. So there are my two triangles. Okay? Again, do your best to make them look the same size and shape. So J, K, L, M, and N. Okay? And then again, statements and reasons, and I go from there. Perfect. And there's the setup. Okay, so a couple things, right? Number 1, look what you have to prove. You have to prove a pair of segments congruent. You are going to do this using CPCTC. Again, the CT stands for congruent triangle. So your first goal is to prove these two triangles congruent. Okay, so let's see how. First, we always put down the given. So segment JL is congruent to segment NL, and segment JK is parallel to segment MN, and that was given to us. Okay, so I'll mark JL congruent with a dash to NL with a dash. So that is a pair of congruent sides, so there's one S on our way. All right, so number 2, let's look at these parallel lines. So JK, I'll put an arrow, is parallel to MN. Now, if I trace the parallel lines, pick one of the other segments going between them. You actually have two choices. I'm going to pick this one right here, the one that has K and M on it, right? You should see the N or the sideways Z. This creates alternate interior angles, which are going to be congruent. The alternate interior angles that I'm going to use are angle K and angle M. They will be congruent. Angle K will be congruent to angle M. And this is because the lines are parallel, and that means alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so now I'm going to put an A down here by K, so there's an angle pair. All right, so now I need a third thing, either a pair of sides or a pair of angles. Well, if you look how the triangles interact with each other, right, they interact on these lines that are crossing. Remember that intersecting lines form vertical angles here and here. And those vertical angles will be congruent. So if we name them, I'm going to name this angle right here, JLK. So angle JLK will be congruent to angle, so JLK NLM. And those are because they're vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. And there is another angle pair. I'll call it an A. So now I have three things congruent between the two triangles. So now I believe I can name the triangles congruent, or say they're congruent. So I'll call the first one triangle JLK. So JLK is congruent to triangle NLM. Use the same lettering as above, right? And that is because, and notice we have two angles and a side, so the question is the side between the angles or not? The side between these two congruent angles would be KL. That is not the one marked congruent. So it's not angle, side, angle. It's angle, angle, side. And now that these two triangles are congruent, all of the corresponding parts are congruent, and that means that JK and NM are not only parallel, but they're also congruent. So step 5, segment JK is congruent to segment NM, and this is because of CPCTC. Okay, so you have a worksheet to cover lesson number 8. And then you are on to the unit to review. All right, great job. Thanks for watching.